Okay, Jenny and Storm on February 16th. Let me share the screen. And so this is just an update on Storm.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Can you see the,
Yep.
let me enlarge it.
So there's definitely some gaps as I negotiate. I forgot my camera holder, so I had to prop it up in the gate bracket.
Oh,
Um,
the make
that was
two,
fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
makeshift
So,
tripod.
right. I actually think we stayed in the camera view most of the time.
Okay.
And I took your suggestion or what we talked about in the call on Monday, and I worked him in the halter. So this is the first time I've long lined on a small circle in the halter, which was
Oh, okay.
interesting. So
Oh, good. So I wasn't sure if you were doing that. You're doing that with him on the flat ground, but not on the hills,
yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah. I did long line him once out in the field, and it was a little bit sloped, but not too bad.
Okay.
Um
Welcome to winter.
and right, oh god. I tried to get the dirt off, it didn't really work.
And this size
Even
circle,
though
sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say this size
Even though this
circle,
is,
it's,
I think our audio must be lagging a little
I
bit.
know there must be a delay. Go ahead.
Um, there is a little bit of a slope in here. It's teeny tiny, but that is where he tends to stop, kind of where he just passed through, um, right there. So it's definitely work for him on this size circle.
Yes, it is like what's great is that he's forward. And I never quite know how this is going to go. Some horses that are notoriously slow actually, or they stop a lot on the long reins, they actually get more forward when you tighten up the circle like this. Other horses, it's like too much work with the hindquarter and they don't get for any more forward, and sometimes it can get worse. They'll lose forward. But he's motoring around. I don't mind if they're slow, as long as they're not constantly stopping. You can work with whatever speed they give you. And so far,
He he does begin to stop as we progress later in, like, further into, so I did 10 minutes each way. And this is his hard side. So,
yeah,
there's also that.
harder on the hind leg, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's good. I always, if I know that there's a weaker hind leg or a stiffer hind leg, I'll tend to go that direction first and get the hindquarters warmed up that way before I tackle the other direction. So this is pretty good. If he starts stopping, like he's stopping within the first 5 minutes, unless he's going to pee. Um,
Yeah, I
but
think he pees.
okay. If he, like the thing I watch with this exercise is if it increases the forward, they may stop once or twice within the 10 minutes at first, but very rapidly they're slow, but they're steady in their forward pace. If the exercise is a bit too much, you could start with just 5 minutes each way. And if he's pretty forward for the first 5 minutes and really not forward the second 5 minutes, you could just do the tiny circle for 5 minutes. And then you have the option to quit there if you're going to ride, or do the second 5 minutes walking around with him using a much larger area.
Okay. He couldn't make up his mind about peeing.
Oh, okay.
Like,
Of
what do you
course.
do?
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing here?
I know every time I videotape Hercules, it's like we have to stop and poop twice every video.
Well, he does that eventually, and he actually pees under saddle is what eventually happens.
Yeah.
Um, But and I feel bad because it's like I could tell he kind of wanted to go, but it was like I don't want to stand there and wait forever, but I also don't want to keep like, urging him on. So
Right. So, and with a horse his size, this feels like the tiniest circle in the world when you're on the
yes.
inside. It just
Yes.
feels like such a tiny circle. And when you look at it on video, you're like, oh, it's not that small of a circle.
Yeah.
But
So
it
what's interesting watching this that I don't feel like again, different perspective from being in the circle, that his neck does not look as long as it felt while I was working. He's nice and
looks
level.
long. Actually, that was one of the things I noticed because I know with the if you do this in the bridle, does he over curl the neck and get behind the bit?
Usually his
Okay.
head is very low, but he's often curled under. So
Yeah. And so it's the curling of the neck is the holding, right? So even if the pole is below the withers, once they're dropping the pole and you see the curling of the neck, they're stuck on the forehand. And what I found was, like in his case, you can see the hindquarters are unsteady. He's not well engaged. It's a struggle for him to be this engaged on this tight of a turn. But I like that his neck is straight and he's not dropping the pole most of the time.
yeah.
And that's where, horses that really excessively get behind the bit and they've learned to hold with this curled neck, that's where changing the pressure from the lower jaw to the upper jaw seems to help them until the hindquarters get more stable and strong. So I would say, because you did try this size circle with the bit first,
Yes,
and
I've
did
done that a couple times.
did he ever come out of over curling the neck, or was he in and out of it, or was he
He
just
was
stuck
in and
there?
out.
Okay. So he's pretty consistently using the neck well with what I'm seeing in this video. It it probably looks longer from your perspective, and he slowly finds more length, but more importantly, if he's struggling a bit, you kind of see him elevate the neck and tighten just a hair. And then as he gets steadier, he lengthens the neck, but he doesn't just, you know, landslide forward.
Yeah.
So, yes, he's holding in the neck a tiny bit, but not over curling is a totally different kind of holding in the neck. And for him or any horse that over curls the neck and drops the pole, it's such a it almost throws their hindquarter out of stability when they do that.
Yeah.
They start pulling back, and it's like the energy no longer goes forward, and you tend to get more side to side forces when they over curl the neck. So I'm finding with that particular issue, going back to the halter and putting the pressure on the top of the jaw and the nose seems to be easier for them. And then
Do
as
you do you think that that is some of why he might be stopping today, because he's in a completely different posture than he had been, and he's still trying to find, he's like trying to find the forward again?
Well, you've got him really using his hindquarters. And like you still get the same effect when you use the bit and they over curl the neck. But I find over time it takes longer because the over curling of the neck is multiplying the instability.
Yeah.
So if he stays forward, he may stop at first because he's not holding in the neck, number one, in the same way, same muscle use as when he over curls. And number two, he's really not dropping the pole. So, like there where he lengthens the neck, he slows down a little, which is what all horses do when they're no longer holding in the neck, but they're actually releasing, like they're authentically lengthening the muscles of the top line. You get no curling of the neck and you get length, but the lower they fall, the more often they stop because they can't quite figure out that the hind leg
Yeah.
stepping forward is the solution. And so they'll tend to stop a lot with that authentic lengthening of the top line muscles and losing control over their body weight.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think he's stopping enough. Let's see. So we're 11 minutes into the video, but that includes you getting started. So it's
Yeah. We're
probably
probably
you're
close to
probably near
changing.
the 10-minute mark.
Yeah.
And he really only stopped once. He's very slow and there's not a cadence to his walk. You can kind of see it's like he's trying to figure out where each foot is going as you're going
Yeah.
around the circle. And what you'll see is more consistent lengthening of the neck with more forward. He'll stop less often at first. Then the second thing you're looking for is that he has a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of regularity or a flow to the walk. And right now it's like almost a step and half halt and step and half halt. And so his feet aren't really flowing forward in the walk. But
Yeah.
the sign that you can even work on this, because this just means it's difficult for him, which probably means it's very useful to strengthening up his hindquarter, both stabilizing, engaging, and building up muscle capacity. He's not stopping. And when I say a horse is stopping, I mean like 3 times per lap.
Well, when he does, it's generally not taking a lot to get him moving again.
Right.
Like, you
And
know, a
that's the
little bit
other
of
thing.
wiggle, some clucking, you know, kind of.
So I would say that is like the low threshold of saying, yes, you could work on this. And it's really lasting the whole 10 minutes. I suspect as he gets a little bit better at this, when you work on it maybe a half a dozen more times, you'll see him find the forward. You'll see
Okay.
him shift into a more rhythmic walk a little bit. It still won't be fast, but he won't stop as often the whole 10 minutes, and then it'll develop a bit of a rhythm with some
Yeah.
length through the neck. It may not be long and low, which is really on this tight of a circle. You don't want long and low. You kind of want long without a dropped pole.
Yeah.
And any version of that, whether it's a little bit level with the withers or below, I don't care. But taking the over curling out of his neck, I think is huge because he's more authentically using the back and hindquarter muscles.
Yeah. The one thing I did notice, which is part of why I don't think I was super concerned about the slowing and almost stopping, is that if you watch his footfalls, they're like all over the place. Like
Yes, that's
his
what I
inside
mean.
hind is like obliquing sometimes it's upright. He's
Yes.
like all over with his legs, and he had that little mini spook. And we talked about that in the lesson as well, that they sometimes get weird before a change, and that was like the whole session because he actually spooked when I went to go get on before. You can't see it because it's out of the video, but you'll see me walk him around because he just like out of the blue. So definitely working on some stuff.
Yeah. But I would say he could do it. I would say stick with this exercise. Keep it about 10 minutes each way. Use it as your warm up before you ride. As he gets a little better at it, you could do a whole session on the tiny circles. But right now, until he looks a little more willing to go forward, and you maybe get 10 minutes without stopping, then I would start to go longer.
Okay.
But right now, I would use this as a warm up. And then when you ride, he's already a little bit warmed up with engagement and stability through the hindquarter and the back. You're going to help him further with that when you ride, and the two should help each other.
Yeah.
But I
So
think,
that's the way we've been using it right now is 10 minutes each way before I ride.
yeah,
Occasionally, if I don't have a lot of time or if I'm trying to squeeze in sessions, I'll just do this 10 minutes each way and nothing else. But
that's fine too. If you only have like a short bit of time to work him, it's kind of convenient because you throw the halter on, the long reins on, and you can just do 10 minutes each way.
yeah.
And maybe on one of those days you push it 15 minutes each way. But no, I really think this is quite good for him and challenging, but workable.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be part of your routine for a while. Like it's going to
Okay.
take him a while, but you should start to feel the rides even before he looks great on the long reins. You should start to feel the rides get easier even faster than he looks good on the long reins.
I think I'm already noticing some differences when I ride.
Yeah, and I'll have to like think about it more and do a bit of research. But I don't know if it really is the way the force of the bit is acting on the lower jaw and how that affects the neck muscles, or if the bit is a little bit of a trigger that, oh, I feel the bit, so my response, my habit is to overcurl my neck and get behind the bit pressure. And I think the telltale sign will be the horses I'm working with in the halter, when they really look good on the long reins in the halter and look like you should see the hindquarters get more muscly. Like by
Yeah.
the time they're good at it, first the coordination comes and then the muscles develop around the coordination. So when they look stronger and more stable in the hindquarter and they're more forward on the smaller circles, then maybe I would try the bit. And the first session, it may be a trigger or a habit, but if the hindquarters are actually controlling the body weight, whether you use a bit or a halter should matter less and less and less over time.
Yeah.
But I'm still not sure at this point with horses that overcurl their neck, if it really is the way the forces are acting that's perpetuating it, or if it's just a learned habit in
Yeah.
association with the feel of the bit, or it could be a little bit of both. I don't know.
I would guess it's probably a little bit of both in the long run. And I don't even know that it would be anything you could completely untangle, because for every horse it's a little bit different, but it's certainly making a difference for him. I also worked Tally without the bit and left her in the halter. And the thing that did surprise me is they were both lighter than I expected in the halter.
Yes. And that's what I mean, that once they overcurl the neck, it's harder to get them off the forehand. It's harder to get the back and hindquarters stabilized to the point that they can resist their own body weight. And it seems to take longer anytime I'm working with a horse that already has the habit of dropping the pole and overcurling the neck. And like Rafalco, when I started with him, he did it in the halter or the bridle. It didn't matter. So I worked him in the bridle for a while, and then when I get in a hurry, I work in the halter, and he kept doing better and better in the halter. And I went, oh, maybe that's his path out. Now that he's actually gaining some strength with his hindquarter, now I see a huge difference between using the bit or the halter for him regarding the overcurling of the neck.
Yeah.
And I see that with Storm because, okay, he's not engaged enough that this tiny circle is easy for him. But as it gets easier, that is the point. You're increasing the engagement. You're getting more
Yeah.
forward rotation of the pelvis, more of the braking phase of the hind legs, and stabilizing that so it's level coming around the circle. So you're getting the thing about the long reins is even if the neck is bent to the outside like that, you're still getting engagement versus disengagement. Where when we
Yeah.
ride, we can skate between the two depending on how much neck bend we have to use.
Which can be really tricky sometimes.
Mm-hmm. But no, I think even this slow pace, like going to the left, he hasn't stopped yet. And I think you're at the 5 minute mark or close to it. And there I open
Yeah.
my big mouth. So,
Yeah, he hesitated pretty long the last lap, and then this is He has this spot. It's like the same space on either side where he gets stuck. That's his like sticky spot.
Yeah, they
But
always have a
he,
spot.
I know, it's so funny. He has more consistent rhythm on this side,
Mm-hmm.
though, for sure. This is also the first time I put the wraps on in a long time because his legs were dirty but dry, so it's been
Yeah,
too
I would
wet.
definitely keep using the hind leg polo wraps to help him figure this out with more ease. Because you can still see his hind legs are pretty unstable. They're in and out of the midline rather than staying square. And that could just be weakness around the stifle. It can be, I don't think he has any hock issues, but like up in the hindquarter where he could use more muscle is around that, all the muscles surrounding the stifle and just above the stifle where he's a little indented in the hindquarters.
Yeah,
That's the tensor fasciolata or fasciolata muscle that is almost primarily responsible for the forward placement of the hind leg. And that's why he's
interesting.
wobbly,
Yeah,
because that's what you should see strengthen, where he looks still a little bit angular and a
yeah,
little indented on the side. This exercise should strengthen the muscles that make the hindquarter look rounder and
nice.
not quite so indented. But
Yeah,
that's why he's struggling is he doesn't have muscle there. He's not
yeah.
strong there.
I also am mildly concerned with his fetlocks in the back that he may be dropping a little bit more, that like he's losing like maybe a little bit of DSLD or something.
No, DSLD is a death sentence.
Yeah,
It's categorized as a degenerative suspensory ligament disorder, means it keeps deteriorating over time.
yeah,
I think his fetlocks are dropping because he's underusing the stifle. He
okay,
actually uses his hocks decently. I don't like he's not totally peg-legged, functionally straight through the hock. He
yeah,
does get some straightness when he's like you can see when he starts pushing the leg looks straight through the hocks for a good portion of the stride. But you also see the hock bending. And
yeah.
some horses you don't see any bending in the hock,
Mm.
and that's where the suspensory can be really taking a beating.
He
I think
does tend to drag his hind feet too.
Well, again, that those are the hind leg joints not fully articulating. And I
Okay.
think it's less hock, more stifle not articulating. So in other words, all the joints have to go through
Yeah.
several phases of flexion and extension with every single stride. To go through one complete stride, they flex, extend each stride.
Yeah.
And so if the joints are a little too extended or a little too flexed, that's what can put stress on the tendon and ligament system. But if you look up higher, he's still a bit wobbly left to right through the top of
Hmm.
the pelvis. So it's like the pelvis, the sacrum, and the lumbar act like one unit. So the area you want to watch to have less side to side motion is right from the back of your saddle pad to the top of his croup. And if you watch it from the inside of the circle, you can kind of see the midline come and go. That's how you see the wobbliness side to side of the hindquarter,
Yeah.
right? It should stay flat where you're not seeing the midline sort of dip side to side from the middle of the circle. It still wobbles a bit side to side, but like both directions, he gets steadier and steadier as he goes. It's
Yeah.
quite difficult for him. So more than 10 minutes, he'll probably just fatigue because you're working muscles that where he's not strong.
Yeah.
But if you chip away at it pretty regularly, you should see the first thing you'll feel is how much easier he is to ride, particularly related to steering and
Yeah.
turning. And then you'll start to see more and more muscle development there.
Yeah.
Let me go back a
I've
little.
already noticed that he's easier to ride. So there was our little lap after he pulled me off the fence and startled himself,
Oh.
and then back. So yeah, really interesting that he got squirrely today, and it's not like it was that breezy. It's not like there was anything. I mean, it wasn't even that cold. I mean, I don't even have my like long skirt on today or my
Uh,
jacket. And so he was just a little bit, especially when we started riding, just a little bit spooky. And there
so
were
is
definitely clunks and things like that that were happening.
so in the round pen on the flat ground, as soon as he drops the pole, your reins are almost useless. So it's like he's doing pretty well. He really is almost taking the contact, but like right there where you see a little drop of the pole, even if you have floppy reins, loosen them more.
Okay.
It's one of those things that once they do that, and that's why the first year on Rafalco, I could hardly touch the buckle without him overreacting and curling. So I had to do everything literally one rein at a time and very slowly, and even that would make him over curl at first, right? So in this round pen, I would let him wander around wherever
Okay.
he wants to go rather than trying to put him on a circle either direction. And I would only focus on keeping your seat steady and level and use the lightest reins possible just to help him keep the neck straight in front of you. If he
Okay.
goes to the fence line like this and stops, we all pick up the rein to get them out of it. Don't do that. Give
Yeah.
leg,
Yeah.
right? So if he tries to stop or if he scrapes you against the fence, give more leg or a little tap with the whip. But the rest of the time, really let him wander
Okay.
and focus on the internal issue of stabilizing the rotation. That's your side to side seat bones. Using your body weight as the resistant force to his lumbar sacrum and pelvis. That's what you just warmed him up for on the long reins. So now your body weight and mass really sitting, like relaxing your back muscles and glutes so that you make yourself heavy towards the back of the saddle.
Okay.
And the less you use the reins, the easier it is to focus on the detail of the sort of left to right tilting and not getting pulled forward when he falls forward.
Yeah.
So you could have even a
So
little bit
we,
lighter rein and look at the pole. It really
yeah.
helps. Forget about steering, look at the pole and line that little tiny space up with your little tiny seat bones, no matter where he goes. And so as he explores changes, he may suddenly make a 90-degree turn to the right or the left. And
Yeah.
that's him learning to change the leg placement. And because he's not super forward, I wouldn't steer too much under saddle. I would just focus on the stability factor. So that line of force between the pole and the tail as a broomstick, and then that line of force left to right under your seat bones like another level broomstick, and kind of focus on that crosshairs, right? And just let him literally, this is a small enough area for him with flat footing. Just let him wander.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he should play with the neck. He can twist the neck, but you just want to take away the lateral bending of the neck 100%. So he
Okay.
can root, he can, if he drops the pole, loosen the reins. That's all you can do. If he roots, lengthen the reins. Don't
Yeah.
restrict the rooting, or if he puts his nose in the dirt, let him have all the reins he needs and you've got a long enough rein on him, you can still sit back in the saddle and not lose the reins. You can work
Yeah.
from the buckle and
Yeah.
1 inch either side of the buckle on the reins. And finally he pees. I can move that
I
forward a
know. I
little.
was like, are we really doing this now?
But pretty good. And so you can see under saddle, his back is getting steadier. The
Yes, I
top of
feel
his
that.
pelvis is get so that's feeling easier for you.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then when you look down at the legs, you go, ooh, 8 legs, crazy legs, doesn't know where his legs go. And
And I
so
feel that too.
yes, and that's when I'll try to I'll play with if they can follow my steering from the saddle, maybe I can help them get the leg kinematics organized. If they can't follow my steering from the saddle and I have to bend the neck to steer or even pull on the rein too much, then I try to do it in a small enclosed space without steering. It
Yeah.
works just as well because he's constantly turning in this space.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is keeping the midline stable and the hindquarters stable while he's constantly turning. And that's all he can do in this space is constantly turn.
Yeah.
So there's no need for the steering.
Okay.
You're just trying to help him stabilize while he's already turning and try to keep him out of over curling the neck and dropping the pole.
Yeah.
And that's been the combination, the same thing we talked about. The horses that do better in the halter on the long reins do better on the buckle when you ride. It's just, it's so hard
Makes
to
sense.
have, it's so hard to even have a rein contact once they get behind the bit.
Could you ride them in the halter?
You could, if you feel safe, you could ride them in the halter. That's where I find it doesn't make any difference at all
Yeah,
because
that would make
my
sense.
my body is again, and that's why I said the pressure on the upper jaw rather than the lower jaw from the bit or the halter versus the bit, it very well could be a dynamic way that the forces are acting on the horse's body that helps them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Where when we ride, now we've moved the resistant forces to straddle the spine and almost sit on the lumbar.
Yeah.
Right? So now our weight and mass and our control over our balance is helping him stabilize and find his balance in a completely different way than the long reins.
Yeah.
So you don't need the resistance on the reins while you're riding because you've got your whole body doing the job.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't find it makes a difference. I actually ride them in the bit because if I don't use the reins, as soon as the back and hind quarter are stable, they come out of over curling the neck. And that way I see that it's not directly related when I add rein pressure. If the back and hind quarter is strong, it should not cause them to overcurl the neck.
Yeah.
And so I'm letting them carry the bit essentially when I ride. So in my mind, that was taking away the habit or the trigger
Yeah.
because the bit's in their mouth, but if there's no pressure on the reins, they overcurl as a habit with the bit or the halter if that's the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
If it's a trigger, they'll overcurl when you ride until you take away rein pressure. Then they'll quit, right? So we add rein resistance back in later, but you can get a boatload done with just your body weight and how you balance. So it's not necessary when you ride to have the same rein resistance you have to have on the long reins. It's
Yeah.
just not
That makes
necessary.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're moving the forces to a different area of influence. When you're on the long reins, the influence is the reins.
Yeah.
So it makes a
That's
much
it.
bigger difference if you're in the
Yeah.
halter or the bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is getting really good.
It
So you,
feels really good. Like I don't feel like I'm getting sloshed the whole time
right.
anymore necessarily.
And when I just said that as he was coming around past the other horses, the turns, he wobbles, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's his idea to turn or your idea, doesn't matter. He's going to wobble on the turn. But when
Yeah.
he kind of finds the perimeter of the round pen and he starts to move out a little straighter, you can really see that stability starting to take shape in the
Yeah.
hindquarters.
Yeah.
And then his neck lengthens and the front end looks unstable, but the
Yeah.
hind end looks more stable. And that's
Yeah.
exactly how it should go. So, like there, when he turns, his pelvis tilts, he gets all discombobulated, he
Yeah.
goes back to his neck. And that's where I would maybe give leg, like when you feel him capsizing sideways, just give a little leg rather than trying to help him with the reins. And
Yeah.
once he starts going forward, he'll also figure out that a little bit more pushing is would be helpful to his stability. And when we use the reins and they overcurl the neck, it's hard to like the tendency is they keep sending the energy backwards rather than
Yeah.
sending the energy forward from the hind legs.
Yeah. This is where he got worried again, which was kind of weird. And it was coming around that side of the round pen.
Yeah.
So there was quite a bit of like the trying to get his neck, down. And so I did bend him more than I had been, intentionally trying to get his focus back.
And I would, because of the space and the footing, save your bending for when you are concerned for safety issues. Like if you really have to get his attention and you feel he's
Yeah.
going to spook, like right now, okay, bend, get his attention back on you, and let him go straight again. But if he's a little bit high-headed and a little bit using his neck upward, keep the neck straight because I think he will walk out of it. And it's going to be easier for him and you the less neck bending you involve at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
So, like now that he's kind of back with you, I
Well, he
would be
wasn't
using
yet.
their, yeah, he kind of
Yeah.
came back to you and then he
Yeah. There it
spooked a
is.
little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is after that, he was mostly fine. And I think somewhere fairly soon, just like we talked about in the group,
He has
there's a big release.
a big adjustment and a
Yeah, I
release.
think it's
Yeah.
a shoulder or something. I feel like it's when we got closer to the camera, but um yeah, it
Yeah.
was weird. I
So
mean, there was like nothing anywhere yesterday that day. It was, I don't know.
they feel it coming.
Yeah.
The process of change can create discomfort. Some horses can even have a pain reaction, which is no good. So when the distraction and the energy come up, you did a really good job sort of using the bend, trying to get him back, and then going, once he was back and calmer, going right back to trying to keep the neck straight. And that's the
Yeah.
best you can do.
Yeah. I feel like it was a hind leg somewhere in here, maybe that like you were talking about it on in the group call, and to
Hmm.
me it feels like they step in a hole.
That's exactly what it feels like.
It's like
Or the
what's
leg,
hole?
or the leg
Yeah,
fell off. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and it can happen all of a sudden because you'll get these soft tissue adjustments where all of a sudden one of the legs has a much greater range of motion than what it's familiar with. And they take that misstep. So not only do you get the feeling of the horse stepped in a hole, that's the muscle change, but as soon as the muscle change, you change the range of motion for the leg, and it's like they don't know where their feet go for a
yeah.
few strides, and they can get really fumbly footed and a little worried. So, like there, I would loosen the reins and push with the legs.
Okay.
Yeah, yes. Loosen the reins even more, unless like he's getting a little distracted, so that's fine. There, I would soften the reins and gently keep your legs on. Not necessarily to increase speed, but to give him the idea that a forward rhythm is the solution here. Like it would
Yeah.
be helpful to his sense of stability to actually let that pushing energy from the hind legs travel forward and out through the front legs. And when they curl the neck like that and drop the pole, what happens is the pushing force from the hind legs kind of hits the front end and like almost circles back into their chest. It just goes forward and down, like circling back on their own front legs rather than lengthening the stride of the front legs and getting them to say, oh, I can put my front feet in different places now. Yeah, like that. That's lovely. That was him figuring it out. And you see
Yeah.
how the cadence got very 1, 2, 3, 4. For just about 3 or 4 strides, it was like he had this nice, even rhythm in all 4 legs. And that's the organization that I would look for on the long reins. You might get it under saddle first because your weight probably helps him a lot. Because on the
Yeah.
long reins, he really is like unstable through the hindquarter and the lumbar. But when you ride him, your body weight is acting as a positive stress that he has to push against, which can also have a very stabilizing effect on the back and
Yeah.
hindquarter.
There were
And
a couple of those hind leg like jerks that happened in the ride too, where he
mhm.
like, I don't, spasm or something, but
He catches his toe once in a while. Like he takes a little bit of a misstep because, like you said, he toe drags behind. And
yeah,
so sometimes it just drags a little longer and he gets like that's what had just happened. Those missteps on the front legs he just did are the muscle tone changing.
yeah,
And that's how immediate it is. The hindquarter made a very small improvement, and all of a sudden there's less muscle contraction affecting the front legs. And that's why they get slow, they stop a lot, they get fumbly footed because that transition of organizing their movement from the front end to the hind end is literally happening simultaneously.
yeah,
And so he hits these windows where he's not stable at either end.
yeah,
Does that make sense? He's not yet
yeah,
super stable on the hind end, but he's stable enough that the front end is starting to let go because it's happening simultaneously. And so they can get in this window where they're like, oh, now I'm just not stable anywhere. And then suddenly I am stable and now I'm not. And they kind of
yeah,
go in and out of that. So you get those 4 really good strides, and then it's like chaos for a little bit.
yeah,
And then you get 1 or 2 where it feels smooth and organized and stable. It just doesn't last very long.
yeah,
But the fact that you're getting them is really good. And it looks like you picked the direction, doing an
yeah,
equal amount of time one way and then the other. I
yeah.
would
I
be I
think,
would be random. I would just
okay,
take the steering out of the equation. I think you'll get farther faster by letting him, if he only wants to go right or left, that's fine. If he constantly changes direction, that's fine. If they really get unstable as the shoulder muscles are changing, they tend to make these random 90-degree turns. Like they just literally kind of fall and you're stabilizing them while they're turning, which is really falling.
yeah.
Yeah, see, there's your good strides again.
He seems to like
Then he loses
going
it a
this
little.
way and going along the fence are the good spots.
Hmm. Yeah. So there, tiny bit of leg support to give him the confidence to say, yes, your front legs can reach farther.
Yeah,
And it will help stabilize the back and hindquarter, just a tiny bit of leg support, not to increase the speed. You'll find that your leg support increases the stability without necessarily making him go any faster, but it will help him feel stable. But this is pretty good.
yeah. I'm very pleased with it. I think we ended up longer in this direction because I thought I set my timer on my watch, but apparently it didn't. So
No, so any questions?
I don't think so.
You can see it coming through in little glimpses.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a few more minutes in this direction. Um, and I think it ended up being close to 15 minutes, but yet he didn't feel bad. So that's why I was was like, he was doing pretty good. And then I finally was like, I think it's been longer than 10 minutes. And I looked at my watch and it wasn't timing. So like,
Oh,
I think that's a
yeah.
good sign, that he was able to keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and from looking at both I would definitely do the small circles on the long reins. I think 10 minutes each way is kind of a maximum right now, but really beneficial. He should stop less and less in the next few sessions. You should start
Good.
to see him motoring forward here pretty quick, but spend the bulk of your time riding and then just don't steer. I
Yeah.
kind of like the enclosure you have. It's big enough he isn't having to turn tight all the time, but it's
Yeah.
small enough he has to he also can't just fall forward, go straight and not come back. He has to turn enough that it's
Yeah.
helping him stay engaged. And I think if you take away the steering, you'll have even less dropping of the pole because you won't need the reins nearly as much.
Cool.
You're really just going to use the reins to say, don't bend your neck or for
Good.
emergency.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that would just speed up the process because he's getting the coordination internally and the steering it's helpful, but I think because of the space you have, you could take away that distraction for both of you and just
Good.
really
Yeah.
focus on that internal stability.
Um, so length of time wise, I think I was aiming for about 20 minutes of riding. Is that a good amount? Should I make it longer than the long reins? What is kind of the good window at this point for him?
I would say 30 minutes minimum. 45 minutes would be pretty ideal. An hour would be once in a while if he, is up for it. He might not be up for an hour. He should easily be able to do 30 minutes, and he's only going to get better the longer you ride.
Good.
And
Okay.
and if you're not steering and not using the reins, I think you'll find he could go 45 minutes because he's only getting more like the more you stabilize the rotation and the alignment, which is why you can take away the steering, the more efficient they become, which means they actually gain energy. There's a little factor of muscle fatigue, right? So, but I think he's strong enough that if you're helping him stabilize the hindquarter and the spine, he's actually going to give you more forward, not less, the longer you go.
Okay.
Yeah, because I don't think he's fatigued as much as he's lacking control over his stability.
Yeah.
He's actually making and looking for the postural change that you want, but he can't hold it because his legs are just not cooperating. His legs are
Yeah.
just in the wrong place at the wrong time, which taken up to the spine means lack of stability.
Yeah.
So you want to keep stabilizing that rocking side to side, keep stabilizing the midline. Oh, this is going crazy. I just want there. Press on it, Kirsten. Okay. I was
The
just
other thing I noticed
going.
about the difference between the halter and the bridle, and it sort of applies to the riding, although I haven't ridden in a halter, so I don't know. But on the long reins in the halter, he did less with his mouth. Like, it's very normal for him to work his mouth a lot and sometimes twist, like, curling down and doing a lot of twisting left and right.
Hmm.
And in the halter and the long reins, there was almost none of that. There was
And
some licking and chewing, which is fine, but like it wasn't like that working kind of action.
yes, and he does get a busier mouth and more often drops the pole when you're riding compared to
Yeah.
what you just showed on the long reins. And the way you know whether that is a habit with the bit or whether, like, what do I want to say? If you loosen up the reins to the point that you're really literally only putting rein resistance one rein at a time for the most minimal amount of time possible, If he continues to gape the mouth and drop the pole, it's a balance issue. If that goes away when you quit steering and you don't use the reins, even you're not using the reins hard, but he's just saying, I need even less.
Yeah.
And if he's fine in the bit under saddle, then I wouldn't even bother experimenting with the halter. If he continues on little to no rein pressure to have the busy mouth that I'm seeing in this video, or he's not dropping the pole a lot, but he's still doing it like there.
Yeah.
Right. So if you see him gaping the jaw, busy in the mouth, dropping the pole with no rein resistance from the saddle, try a ride or two in the halter and see.
Okay.
But typically, like when I ride Rafalco, even if I have zero rein pressure, and whether I was in the halter or the bridle, even under saddle, he still gaped his mouth, chomped, and that to me became, this is the way this horse expresses the struggle he's having,
Yeah.
right? That's just his go-to to express struggle. So at that point, I go, I may as well put the bit in his mouth and not have rein pressure so that it's less of a trigger when I do use rein resistance.
Yeah.
But the real answer was I have to build up the stability in the back and hindquarter because he's just telling me that's where he's struggling.
Yeah.
And
And
sometimes that can be the over curling or the busy mouth is it just goes, hey, I'm not using myself well enough. I'm struggling.
and I think that's what we've always kind of associated with him, is that it is the struggle. And so it was really interesting to see that disappear on the long reins with the halter and a nice long neck, which he's never really achieved
Yes.
yet.
And I
So
think you may find, like I did, he may curl the neck a little bit more when you ride just because he's struggling more with the weight. But I found when I went to a looser rein under saddle and the halter on the long reins, the neck curling went away very quickly
good.
in both scenarios.
Yeah.
So I could still have the bit in the mouth when I rode, but I wasn't getting the neck curling as long as I kept the reins pretty loose.
Yeah.
And what that turned into is once I went from sort of not steering, I got a certain amount of stability and consistency there. Then, and I'll show this in the group on Monday, Rafalco is now doing much tighter figure eights, straight and level. And that is now really altering the use of the neck to where he takes a contact without
Mm,
dropping the pole. But
nice.
that neck use and taking the contact is the result of getting more lift of the back, more engagement, plus the lateral stability. So it's been an evolution, but that's what I'll
Yeah.
sort of show on Monday with him because it was a long time coming. It was like,
Yeah.
oh
I
my God.
know.
Yeah. They get in that habit with their neck and you can't, that's why I'm saying don't even steer, is because anything that involves the reins when they do that, it just slows down progress.
Yeah.
So I go try to ride him with zero rein pressure, as little as possible, and literally only rein pressure on one rein at a time, never two. Like
Yeah.
not even a contact amount. I go loose, floppy. And that's why if you're steering, you kind of have to have a shorter rein because you're acting
Yeah.
quicker. You're not restricting the neck, but you're having to act faster to help him with the steering. And that can just keep triggering the same habit, and that's why it takes longer.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, this is very good.
Now, if we can just keep the ground dry so that I can actually ride, we'll be fine.
I know, I know. But he's doing well. We just have to look past the mud spots for now and
Ugh,
wait for get the
apparently, he
vacuum
likes
out.
to sleep in the manure pile.
I know the
And
gray
the
ones
worst of
love
spots.
the poop piles.
Yeah, it's like in his forelock. I'm like, really? Why are you smearing your face on it?
Yeah, Prima, my gray horse, always had, she would lay on it like it was a pillow. So she always had a little poo stain on her jaw because she liked it as a pillow.
Oh my.
I know, gross.
Yep.
All right.
So
So
cool. Thank
I,
you.
yeah, I think that's good for now. And I look forward to seeing another one soon because I think with those few minor changes, he's going to start feeling different really quickly,
Good.
really
Yeah.
quickly.
My goal is to try and long rein him at least once a week and ride and long rein also. Like, so try to get 2 sessions in on the long reins, but it looks like we have a whole bunch of rain coming. So I don't know what's gonna happen, but we'll see.
No, and sometimes, like if you're there doing stuff, if you only have 10 or 15 minutes, do one direction. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like try to
Yeah.
chip away at it too if you can, and you'll have a whole lot more fun this summer.
Yeah. It's just been so slick. That's been the thing that's been hard is that like we get a little bit of rain and it just gets really slippery and that isn't the easiest for him to work on. So, I mean, I guess he has to engage more if it's slippery. So there's that.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it's mucky and muddy, but when I put down my arena footing, it's all a thick layer of clay. So it takes a while for the clay to sink and the sand to come up. And it is slick, slick, slick. It's like being in Maryland when I first get the arena clay down. And I went out there and played with it. And if it wasn't too bad, I found that they actually picked up their feet a little bit better because of the slippery factor.
yeah,
And each horse is unique, but I found my guys were very thoughtful with that little bit of slippery mud. If it wasn't if it wasn't like, the leg goes out from under them kind of slippery, but if it was just deep enough that they could have some grip, they
yeah,
did fine, especially on the tiny circles, because they not only had to increase braking and forward to hind leg placement from the size of the circle, but they really had to brake to avoid slipping
yeah,
and
yeah,
sliding. So I think
yeah,
they worked a little bit harder in it, but it wasn't unworkable.
yeah.
So give it a
Well,
try.
fingers crossed that's what we get and we don't get soup. So we'll
Yeah, the
see.
hard part is keeping your long reins out of the mud.
Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten fairly good at that. I've figured out how many folds you have to have without getting everything tangled, but getting started can still be a little
Yeah,
dicey.
yeah.
So, well, very good. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
All right, my dear. See you later.
See ya.
Bye.